All right. Mid-season plants. So these are the ones that we consider, they grow really fast. So they have like a 30 to 45 day growth cycle from when they're started to seed to when they're harvested, or even sometimes when they're pulled out of the garden. So we like to start these about 3 weeks before our average last freeze date. They grow really fast as baby plants. And so like tomatoes and peppers and eggplants, they take forever. They grow so slowly, which is why we start them so early. These guys, like you just turn around and look back and they're already like 2 inches taller than they were when you last saw them.
The butternut squash we planted last year was like that. It was prolific.
It grows
and it came up so fast.
Yeah. So I learned a long time ago, I used to start these seeds at the same time I started some of my others. And like, they're huge by the time it was ready to put them out in the garden. And then they're not really healthy. It's not really healthy to grow these plants to a giant size and then try to transplant them. They get a lot more of a shock. And there's quite a few of the mid-season crops that are best direct seeded. And again, I just want to encourage you to pre-sprout the ones that you can. So beets and radishes, even turnips, you can pre-sprout in a sprouting jar. Carrots are pretty tiny. I don't think I would try to do that. But those are all best planted also right before a rain. That's a really good way to just ensure that you get an even watering during that germination stage.
Someone also asked, John wants me to make sure I click a button so we're both on.
Oh, there you go.
Ooh, fancy. Okay, do you use sprouting jars to pre-sprout the seeds? I saw that question after we had moved on from that topic. Mm-hmm. Since you're talking about it again,
I just use a mason jar that has a sprouting lid. So it's not like a specific sprouting jar. It just has a screen. You can buy them at Sprouts, a little sprouting screen.
Yep.
Yeah, and they're fabulous. All right. Squash tips. I tried to pick the plants I get the most questions about. Everybody wants to know about squash bugs. Yes, you're going to get them 100%. Unless it's the very first year of your garden. Typically on the first year, you won't see them, but after that, 100% guarantee they will come. So we don't use pesticides in our garden. We do like to use a barrier method. So when we first plant our squash plants, and I mean literally like the day of, you need to cover your bed with some kind of netting. If you plant your squash plants and come back a week later to cover them, the squash bugs will already be there. Okay.
They come in fast.
Yeah. So just when you're trying to figure out like your plan for the garden for that day, and if your plan is to plant a squash bed, make sure that you have the supplies and the time to cover it also. Because I can't tell you how many times I've planted the squash bed, gone to my garage to get the netting, only to realize I'm out of netting, So make sure that you have your supplies on hand before you get started. And then I kind of wish like I hadn't planted my squash. And sometimes I'll even like pick them back up.
Because they come in that fast.
Because they come in that fast. Absolutely. So we leave that netting on until the squash start flowering. And then you're going to have to pull it off in the morning so that they can get pollinated by the bees. You can like drop it during the rest of the day, but for sure in the morning, they need to get that pollination. Another thing that we like to do once the plants start getting bigger is you can just manually look for the squash bugs. I have read that if you squash the squash bugs, which they make a very distinct smell, they're like, I can typically smell squash bugs before I ever see them because they have a very, I can't even describe it. Once you squish one, you'll know.
Like rotten
it's a
eggs,
very, I don't know how to describe it. But so what we like to do is just take an empty soda bottle or something and put a little bit of dish soap in there. And then we put the live squash bugs in there and drown them.
Yeah.
And actually it makes me very happy when I see this entire bottle of dead drowning squash bugs. But again, if you squeeze them, then they emit this smell. And I think that attracts other squash bugs. The other thing you want to be looking for the adult squash bugs like to hide on the underside of the plants. So you want to pick up the bottom leaves and inspect for those. Then the other thing you want to do is take a piece of duct tape and wrap it so it's sticky side out on your finger. And you want to pick up these bottom leaves and look for eggs. So you'll see there'll be clusters of little brown or brownish eggs all together on one of the leaves. And you just pick them off with that duct tape. Okay. So that's about all we do to manage the squash bugs. When you have the plants covered and they're able to get to the stage where they're at least flowering, they're healthy and big enough that they'll be able to take some squash bug damage. They're going to set some fruit. And then at some point they will succumb to the damage of it. So at that point, we pull all the squash plants out of our garden. We have no squash in our garden for 2 weeks, and then we plant again. And typically in that 2-week period, the squash bugs have moved on to somebody else's garden, and we're able to have another round of it.
Time to get the eviction notice.
That's right. Another thing that we really like to do is we grow this variety. It's called Rampicante, and it is, or Trombacino is another name. It is a solid stem squash. So the squash bugs don't like it. They don't attack it. And it is a fabulous squash because you can pick it in the summer squash stage. So it's very tender like a yellow squash or a zucchini. Or you can leave it in your garden and you can allow it to go to the winter squash stage where it develops that hard rind on the outside and it tastes just like a butternut squash.
Wow.
So it's a dual purpose. I don't know of any other dual purpose squashes that you can treat like that to eat it either way.
I was like looking at this picture the whole time. I'm like, is
yeah,
that a cucumber squash?
No, and what's fabulous. So the whole neck is all flesh. So when you get to a butternut squash, it's got that nice little neck with no seeds, and then it's got the seed cavity, right?
Yeah.
Well, this thing is like all neck.
Ooh.
And so we canned a bunch of it last year. We had so much of this squash. I will warn you, it is a giant plant. Like if you plant one plant, it's probably going to take a 20 by 20 area.
Wow.
Like it's huge.
Yeah, look at your hand.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and it doesn't like it grows all summer long. It's very, it just can handle a lot of stresses, but I really like it because it's so productive and it doesn't have a problem with the squash bugs. So variety is very important when you're picking things to be successful with.